Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. We have a great presentation for you today. The title, Stop Employee Data Exfil. We have adaptive AI access based on content and context. And we have two wonderful panelists today with us joining us from Netskope. And we will go through this presentation with you. I'll get it kicked off a little bit. We are the Inc. 5000, America's fastest growing private company for 2 years in a row. We've actually just recently won the award for the third year in a row. We've made that list again. So it's quite an honor for our company. We are a cybersecurity and managed IT services provider. We are in 60 countries across the globe. We have over 500,000 humans protected. And once again, we are one of the fastest growing MSSPs in America. And so today we will get into our agenda. We have adaptive AI access based on content and context. We're going to go over data exfiltration into personal SaaS and AI, security service edge, modern security gaps, context matters, data movement, user and entity behavior analytics, and adaptive access control. And so now I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. We have Tom Clare from Netskope. He is a security expert. And we have Jeff Brainard from Netskope as well, a networking expert. So at this point, I will pass it over to you guys.
Sure. Thank you very much. Yeah, Tom Clare, been in the business for a few years in product strategy, management, marketing, also managing over the book, Borderless Behavior Analytics. We're talking about that topic today, often in dealing with insider threat programs, employee theft, espionage, monitoring, those type of topics. See the various vendors I've worked with. I've been at Netskope going into my seventh year, so I've been with the company for a little bit of the journey, and I focus on a lot of our inline solutions, which we'll be talking about today. And let me have Jeff introduce himself.
Hey, thanks, Tom. So, Jeff Brainard, Senior Director of Platform Strategy here at Netskope. I've been with the company just over 5 years. I work in the platform engineering organization, and I'm really going to be kind of the networking expert on the call today. A lot of experience in this area, working on proxies, caching, CDN in the past, SD-WAN, and look forward to talking to you about networking and what Netskope has to offer. Back to you, Tom.
Sure. Just one quick slide on the company. Been around now a little over 11 years. If you looked at us a couple years ago, we've changed a lot. To me, it's almost every 90 days, it's a new company. We put out 11 product releases a year as a security SaaS, growing the base pretty good. We'll show you some of the analyst ratings and stuff real quickly as well. But again, this thing just keeps growing. Jeff's going to show some of our network infrastructure. It's been quite a journey. Again, seventh year for me, and what it was a couple years ago, to what it is today is just very, very different. So fast moving machine, a lot of momentum. And again, you can see the stats across the bottom. I think we're eclipsing over 4,000 customers now, and we're happy to be partnered with Ridge IT. All right, so users, apps, data is everywhere. That was kind of the theme early on. I think it's more prevalent now. Almost half or over half your traffic is related to SaaS versus web. Most threats are there. A lot of people go, well, my managed SaaS is pretty clean. It's like, well, it's the personal instances, rogue instances. That's where all the threats are. You probably don't look at those. A lot of people don't realize they have thousands of SaaS apps. I mean, I've watched the Okta at Work report over the years, and used to be 40, 60. I think they're up to 100 apps that IT manages. IT has administration rights, but there's a lot of apps that just take an email ID and a credit card, and they're brought into the company by business units, business leaders. They're tied into Marketo systems, Salesforce systems, Workday, other app ecosystems. And so it's not uncommon to see 5, 7,000 apps inside of a company. And of course, a lot of these apps have the company version or what was acquired and used by someone in a business unit, but they also have personal versions. Like I have my own G Drive, my own Gmail versus the company Gmail and G Drive and other things. So personal cloud storage is a big issue with employee data exfiltration and theft. We'll talk more about that. Most of the traffic is encrypted. You're gonna have to open up TLS and inspect it. So you got the certificates and that stuff. It takes a very strong, powerful network to create a great user experience. And Jeff is gonna jump into that with quite a bit of detail on how we do that. So you have to have the context we're going to talk about in the content, but you have to do it all very, very quickly. When you get those two together, you've got the secret sauce for success. All right, so the challenge is everything. Continued risk of data breaches and data losses, diminished user productivity. If you have legacy architecture, it doesn't scale. Let me put that in simple terms. Most data theft is tied into personal cloud storage. Let me give you an example. So we would go out in POVs and do examples and show people, and then they see the file names, and then they realize, hey, 450 files of source code were just stolen into this personal cloud storage. Here's the person's identity based on their UPN or email ID. And they're like, hey, stop the meeting. That person's actually in HR right now. I need to stop them from leaving the building. That was pretty common. Stuff like that happened. So from these generic kind of marketing statements here, continued risk of data breaches and data loss, kind of have to ask yourself a question. If someone turned in their resume or turned in their resignation and said, I'm leaving the company, here's my 2-week notice, could you go back 90 days and look at their use of personal cloud storage and personal apps and look at the file names and the activity, what they're doing? Because there's a lot of data theft. A lot of people, because of COVID and other things, feel entitled to data and that they can take it to them to the next job for their job success. They may even think that they're actually, they're supposed to do this. They're not. And so once we show this, people kind of wake up. We also, of course, the productivity user experience shows up too. When you try to turn on these type of controls with legacy features, the user experience falls. You just can't do it. So they're like, well, we tried, but we can't do it. It's too slow. We remove that. We give you the content and context, and we're going to give you the speed and the performance. And so you're not forced to choose between security and performance. That's one of the top level messages today is that whenever you're forced to choose those, you're probably talking to the wrong solution, the wrong vendor. You should get very, very high speed today with the way we build these data centers, these solutions, and you should get the rich context so you can see what's being taken for data theft or espionage or other type of activities. So why Security Service Edge? I was in the legacy secure gateway business. You might have noticed my 8 years or plus at Blue Coat. Jeff and I both worked at Blue Coat together. We're very familiar with web proxies, but they have their limitations. What about SaaS? What about Shadow IT? Or now it's Shadow AI. What about cloud service providers or IaaS? What about custom apps that are public facing? These are blind spots, and these cause issues. Again, half that web traffic or more is in these blind spots. Most of your malware, your phishing, your ransomware, it's delivered this way. That's what people access. Again, 300% increase in data theft is normally the last 30 days of employment. People get ready to leave. They're going to collect a lot of data. 2, 3 weeks before they give their letter of resignation, they've already collected the data they want. They've taken screenshots, they've done other stuff. And again, over 74% of data exfiltration will go into personal cloud storage. That's not what's managed. Like, for example, the Okta at Work report, that's what IT manages. Those are 60, 80, maybe 100 apps that the company manages. This is a personal cloud storage that they have access to and they can send stuff to. And we have the ability to have visibility on that and see what people are doing. That's part of our whole inspection process. So it's very important. All right, so that high risk zone, just again, personal instances of applications, rogue instances of applications, that's where the malware is coming from. That's where the data theft is, right? So your managed stuff that your company controls, your IT team runs, probably pretty clean for malware. And obviously, data theft going out, people downloading files or copying files over, you might see that if you got activity monitoring, stuff like that. But where it's going is really important. And you want the A to B, and we can provide that. All right, passing the blind spots. Again, it's kind of interesting because GitHub is used for malicious content. It's normally stage 2 or 3 in an attack kill chain. So we still see a lot of OneDrive, see a lot of Microsoft stuff at the top of the food chain. Google Drive moved back up for years. It was less than 1.5%, 2%, but it's moved back up. Amazon S3 is in there. Again, a lot of people skip this stuff, bypass it. They say, oh, we don't look at Office productivity suites for inspection. That's a big risk. I mean, there was an argument for years that your legacy proxy appliance couldn't scale, maybe didn't have the capacity for TLS, or your firewall couldn't do that. If you did turn on TLS inspection, performance was way, way down. You really don't want to take appliances past 68, 70% utilization or load. They're just not built to scale past that. You have failovers. And so people either can or can't due to hardware limitations. Again, SaaS removes all that. Or they may just say the user experience, we can't do it. Or a vendor recommended, we don't want our traffic inspected. And now those days are gone. There's no reason not to inspect because the performance is now stellar. And what's at risk is huge, even more so when we bring AI into it. Not only AI agents, which are going to automate tasks for people using credentials and stuff, but also just using Gen AI apps to write prompts to go ahead and input data and develop, whether it's a private LLM, a company LLM, or it's a public one. And so these are all areas that we have to do inspection on. Again, data exfiltration, again, personal SaaS AI, again, that 300% increase, that 74% I talked about. You can see Google Gemini at the bottom. ChatGPT is the fourth one up in light blue. You see the typical culprits, Google Drive, OneDrive, LinkedIn, Facebook, what you'd expect, a lot of data exfiltration in those paths. And these are all areas you have to watch. This is the world we live in. There's a work-life balance. People expect to use their personal apps as well as their company apps at the same time. The device may be managed or unmanaged. That has to become irrelevant. You have to protect the unmanaged device and whatever it's accessing just as well as the managed device, because we want that productivity gain where they're working in different various conditions and different situations. All right, we built the Netskope One platform, just a generic overview we're going to talk about. So you'll see the NewEdge network at the bottom underneath our zero trust engine for content and contents inspection. But we have this ability to use AI powered, we use AI models for phishing detection. We train our encoders and decoders and build that. We have HTML smuggling detection. We can pick off malicious PE files, all sorts of AML data classifiers. There's over 65 different models just in behavior analytics we're going to talk about a little bit with 180 detector rule. So a lot of AI ML there. Again, one platform, one console, one engine. And again, the user experience is really critical. If you don't have the user experience, you have to turn it off. And if you have to turn features off, you get blind spots, and blind spots hurt you. All right, seamless integration is also critical. You just can't have this platform without tying into identity management, various cloud providers, obviously all the different SaaS apps and partnerships, your SIM source systems, your email security, again, your SD-WAN, your router architecture, your networking, your endpoint security, extended detection response, and of course, endpoint management. These are all areas. There's over 100 different integrations, different partnerships for Netskope. So again, that's key. Is not only want to come in and simplify, consolidate, improve operational effectiveness, improve your threat and data protection efficacies, but make sure that we integrate and automate, right? So lots of APIs, lots of automation, make all this stuff become seamless. All right, so this is the one message. So again, one console, one engine that was built. I'll show you the next slide, which is kind of a placemat of what was integrated. So this is the simple look, but if you're an architect or someone who's been in the business like me looking at solutions, it looks more like this. These are the 13 or 14 solutions that have evolved over the years to be built into Security Service Edge on the far right-hand side of the slide. So we started out with our bastion hosts, our packet filters, our stateful inspection firewalls. I spent years at Checkpoint working on those. Our proxy cache is developed really to become the web gateway versus the network gateway and the email gateway and all that different stuff. And the behavior analytics really came on the scene at first, really looking at DLP alerts, and now we're into full CASB and inline and all the detail we can get. And so this, this is the one simple chart, one console, one engine, one client, one network, but all this gets integrated. So if you want to turn on remote browser isolation, all you do is invoke one command, which is isolate, put isolate in the policy and the category of the app or whatever you want to do, and it'll get isolated remote browser isolation. If you want to use enterprise browser, that's a steering method, right? So that's a steering method into our platform. We can do policies specific to enterprise browser versus Netskope client or versus a tunnel, GRE or an IPsec tunnel. And so this is really the behind the scenes. This is the architecture placemat, what you may replace or what you may add on. You don't have to use it all at once, and probably you can't. It takes time. You start with specific areas, build out, and over time you start to use the features as you progress and mature your security posture with the solution from that standpoint. Of course, we've got the remote access across the bottom and purple there. All right, so how do we enable the business agility of NewEdge? Just a couple quick highlights. I'll let Jeff do the details. But we build out these data centers, and everything I just showed on that placemat has to be in that data center. So all data centers run full services, full security services, full networking services, full analytics services. They're broken into three major areas. So that's available. So you don't have to do any service chaining or hops or you go down to South America for a data center, but you go pop back to Miami to do DLP, then you go back down to South America for the continue the process. That doesn't happen. A full data center does everything. It has all capabilities, all situations. We optimize everything. And Jeff will talk more about that. But I just wanted to relate this chart, this one diagram with all this stuff that's been built together, all through one UI and everything, into it has to run in a data center and it's available to you on demand when you need it. And you get some really cool features like dedicated egress IPs, optimized routing. We'll talk all about that, along with the proxy inspection, the firewalls, the IPS, the DNS security, the things that you'd expect in there. All right, so the gap, to kind of make it more visual, a standalone CASB API, Cloud Access Security Broker, really looks at about 3% of your apps. Those are your managed apps. That's what I talked about from the Okta at Work report. IT has 40, 60, 80. I think the latest report says 100 different apps that people have under IT management with access rights they can use. And those are your company, your ERP, your core apps, your office productivity suites. But then the company adopts apps, and that's BU, business unit led SaaS, the second column, user led SaaS, the third column. And your secure gateway is great at the web. Your next gen firewall is good at allow deny, even has apps and things like that. But it doesn't really understand the difference between personal instances for thousands of apps versus company instances and all the different activities. Can it coach the user along the journey? Can it collect justifications? Can it throw up a reauth? All sorts of stuff that has to happen. That gap can be pretty strong. And also, all the way over is VPNs for private apps and network access control, NAC. That all starts to come in the picture. So this is all blending. And so what we do is we apply that zero trust engine across that span of apps and web and private apps using our controls, our rich content and context to then protect you. So the gap is kind of a blind spot. Like I said, until it's kind of like pictures of your vacation or pictures of your kids. You kind of show them, people go, yeah, nice kid, nice vacation, whatever. But when it's their kid, it's their vacation. It's more important. Well, it also works with data that way. You show like, here's a report of, people that have different instances and they're kind of yawning looking at it. And then you go do a proof of concept, proof of value, and you actually go, oh, here's your data. And like I said earlier, here's an employee stealing over 500 source code files. And they're like, what? And then, they really get attention. Things really start to happen. So until it's your data, your company, your experience, then that gap becomes real. Most people kind of ignore the gap, their careers go on. Maybe you're not really tied into SaaS apps, that's not your part of the company. But it's there and it's growing. SaaS is growing 20% plus year over year. It keeps building and that gap gets bigger and bigger. And there's a lot of activity in there for, again, threats and data theft and also employee data theft and loss. And that's where we're going to give you the visibility and the controls to get a handle on that. All right, a couple other ways of looking at the gap. If you look at our Zero Trust engine, and we can show you different controls across the top of the slide, but if I build out a legacy SWIG, which I worked on for years, you got your identity, you got your URL categorization, you got your allow deny, you can filter strip and replace 502 different web objects, you can say block all PDFs, you can do a lot of coarse grained stuff, you got your threat, some data risk stuff, pretty basic. Your policy actions are pretty simple. At top, we kind of bring in a bunch of new stuff. We go, what's the application? What's its instance? If we don't know its instance, let's map the company identity versus the personal email on there. Because SaaS is really about email ID is often your identity, right? Email ID and password is how you enter SaaS. So that world has a different context than what you do to like logging into a network with your identity. The behavior risk assessment, how they're doing lately, what's their risk score, and how's that going up and down. We also can bring in outsider risk variables, such as their identity risk, their device risk, posture risk. We can share app risk and user risk with other solutions. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Threat is, all the stuff you can do inline plus background. And then, of course, your data risk too. What's the sensitivity of the content? Your policy actions are very different. Here you see coach. Like, Tom, you're going to download 150 source code files. We don't think that's a good idea. You're going into personal cloud storage. Can you provide a justification for doing this? And I would go, oh, geez, Big Brother's watching. I think I'll hit cancel. And most of the time, our threat research shows people will hit cancel when they know someone's watching. Or I say, no, no, this is a really hot project. I'm working with an outside web development team. Currently, some services are down. This is the best path for me to get the data to them. So I type in what I'm doing, I go ahead and do it. Because we do want to enable resilience. Tom's personal G drive may help the company if the main office productivity suite goes offline. So you can type in the popular vendors that have office productivity suites and check on their availability. You'll find out once, twice a year, sometimes they disappear for 6, 8 hours and they are offline. So you have to have plan B. So you don't want to just block, because just blocking is, the resilience isn't there. The employees may have to use their personal apps to get the job done. And you also want to learn about those exceptions to refine your policies. So your zero trust principles are put into place for all the fine-grained exceptions you need to know about. Because just a coarse blanket of allow deny just doesn't scale in today's environment. A lot more gray areas in our policy, and that's where context really comes into detail. Uh, Advanced use cases, right? So we got this instance awareness we talked about. There's a few vanity URLs, right? They actually put the company name in the URL, so it's easy to say, oh yeah, that's abccompany.whateverservice.com, real easy. But most of them aren't. I mean, a lot of them it's just google.com or it's a simple domain. You can't tell whether it's a personal instance, a company instance, since you have to do the inspection, decode the XML, dig in there and find out. Or if it doesn't offer that, you need to actually start mapping and watching how they log in and say, oh, they're using their Gmail address to log in this app. This app most likely is looking like it's personal. They're not using the company domain to log in, the company email ID. So you can also do that for, again, thousands of apps. Real-time user coaching I talked about, very important. A lot of CISOs like this because we can offer the advice during the transaction as it happens. All of us are training. Matter of fact, we just had our security training came up. I have to sit through it again. So once or several times a year, you spend an hour clicking through some training to meet your compliance regulations. But really, it's best if it's in line when it happens. Tom is doing something, and that is a danger or risk to the company. We need to warn him he's doing that, and provide a justification. Don't do it. Or here, this is what you're supposed to do. Use this company instance. Tom wants to optimize some code, and he accidentally just went to the public version of ChatGPT. He needs to use the company LLM model, the private version, that instance. And so it's like, no, no, don't use the public version. You can do what you're doing, but just go over and use the company version that's been authorized for source code development and optimization. Risky activities, whenever people want to, there's the usual bulk stuff, but we got all sorts of other things that people do. We can go ahead and approve. So there's, some apps have over 20 different activities, and we provide controls in line for all those. Threat detection, threat everywhere is very, very important. We're very, very, very deep on our DLP plus our data guardrails. And of course, the threat levels are multiple tiers. I'm not going to go deep into that because our focus is really just on the data theft area. But if you have a big compliance data at rest, you need exact data match, you need fingerprinting, things like that. We have that at scale for millions and millions of rows. We can do that. Preventing unsanctioned IaaS usage. Again, developers are often there and these cloud service providers and stuff. All that's under control. And again, that identity mapping I talked about earlier. If you don't have the instance awareness provided by the app, you always do the identity mapping and close that up to make sure you know what's going. You also have app tagging. You can do on all apps. You can tag them yourself, put them in your own classification scheme. All right, here's an example of a Sankey chart. What's this stuff look like? So here's a user, there's Jurgen, he's got related identities in column 2. There's business apps. You see the one highlighted, Microsoft Office 365, OneDrive for Business. There's his personal instance, starts with an M there, it's an orange. Then in purple, kind of going up, there's the uploading of data. So here we're showing Jurgen uploading data into his personal instance. And this is what you can do with rich content and context. So you really don't know what's going on your network with all these different apps until you get this level of detail. You would not get this out of a standard secure gateway or a standard next-gen firewall. It just don't have this level of context and detail. And again, we can monitor, we can alert, we can coach, we can collect justifications, refine policies, offer safer alternatives, step up or block. One example, over in Germany, they do 14 days of warnings because the works councils demand that. And then after you've been warned for 2 weeks, they can start blocking or put in stronger controls. And so this can be monitored for 2 weeks. You can actually click on that where it says uploading data. You can see all the files, the file names, you know exactly what's happening with that instance. So again, this is the level. If you're into employee data exfiltration and controls, you want to amp up your insider threat program. Again, putting in a secure service edge, a SASE architecture with a solution like ours is going to give you that control and this kind of visibility to get a handle on what's happening, and then how to refine it and hopefully remove it. All right, here's another slide that kind of plays that same game with typical controls, but I'm going to start to dig into UEBA, right? So UEBA is kind of the, whatever it is, 8th, 7th, 8th column over. You can see the arrows by it. We have inputs in line. We have inputs from API. We have private access. We have cloud firewall or firewall as a service bringing things in there. And so we really start to understand the user behaviors. Tom been on a lot of, job sites. Has there been resume activity? What has he been doing for data exfiltration? We'll go through some examples from that standpoint. So this is kind of an intro into user entity behavior analytics. The entity was introduced years ago. It's not used as much. Most people, it's just UBA. Originally, when we put that book together, a lot of stuff was driven by DLP alerts. DLP alerts tend to be noisy, a lot of noise there, so you had to kind of filter through them. Some early machine learning models to do that. But now we have this rich, like what's the app instance, what's the activity. And so for a person like myself, when I joined Netskope, I was like, oh, this is the 800-pound gorilla of proxy inspection. You have so much rich context here that the behavior models can just go to another scale. Like we have over 65 now, and we've got another 20 that we'll be adding a little bit for C2 detection because command and control, right? So if I infect your system with a Cobalt Strike and I don't put the beacons that you use, because all your apps have beacons, they're doing updates and everything. And if I put beacons on there that don't fit me or my group or my peer group, then I'm going to stand out. And so instead of using IPS and firewalls and trying to do signatures and matching to pick out C2 beacons, you can actually pick out beacons through behavior models. We have a white paper on that on our website. And you can say, look, Tom has his normal activity. This is when he turns on his laptop. This is when he works. We could tell when he's drinking his coffee. This is when he takes his lunch break, normally later in the day at 2. This is when he shuts down. We know his apps activity. And all of a sudden you infect my site and put in some command and control. And those are beacons that I don't use. They're going to stand out right away as an anomaly. So it's a really kind of cool way to go after that. So we'll be going on just beyond the data theft, the insider theft, into C2 beacon detection. That features in beta test right now. All right, so behavior analytics, there's the standard stuff we do, sequential anomaly rules, been around for a long time, typical type regression analysis type things, uploads, downloads, bulk activity. But the really cool stuff's in orange. This is where we bring in the models. We're going to go into those. You've got user confidence indexes, that risk scoring. There's event correlation timelines. You can reset anything. I'll talk about that in a little bit. It's the pretty cool stuff. Here's an example. Bruce does 99 uploads to Google Drive. That's below the rule of 100. Robin does 100 and gets labeled as suspicious because the rule's written 100 or more, equals to 100 or more. Well, Bruce has a behavior profile, a baseline of 1 file per day, but just did 99, which means, okay, he's really way out of his zone. And it's also a personal instance because now we know that context. And there's some DLP violations. And so basically, Bruce's UCI, user confidence, would start to drop very quickly. And you'd probably access is restricted. You'd probably ask or coach, ask for some reasons or something, or just say, look, you're going to block you. We're not going to let you do this. Now, Robin has a regular activity of uploading 100 plus files to Google Drive. Maybe works in marketing on the websites, moving a lot of files around all the time. That's normal, right? Robin should not be suspicious based on a sequential anomaly rule. So what we were using a decade ago, you need to kind of put behind you if you're doing a lot of static rules in your SIM or your SOAR and you're trying to do stuff like that or threat hunting. The machine learning models now, we have the ability to look at a baseline for a user, again, using training data, using previous data to build the baselines out. And then you use peer groups. A lot of people say, what if the baseline includes a bad activity? Well, by developing a peer group, all the peers would have to be in collusion of the same bad activity to be smooth or the same. And so if Tom has a bad activity that's on the training data or the baseline data, it's going to show up along his peer group as he's the only peer that's doing this. That looks like an anomaly. So the reason we have peer groups is to take training or input data that has bad activity already in it that has to be picked out. So just the profile on the individual is not enough. You need peer groups, and of course you do that across the business unit and across the company. All right, what are some cool insights? Again, we have like 180 plus detector rules, over 65 different models. There's an 847. There's a score which is good. It starts at 1,000. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We deduct it for different events, reduce it. If any event is, let's say it's a false positive, you can reset it or take it out and reset the score. So again, nobody gets penalized, they shouldn't be. This is the whole idea. And then you can use this in real-time policy control. So you can look at the UCI, when a transaction, say, what's the current UCI? How are they doing? So they're trending down for the day. Well, then the policies can start to tighten up. You can move the user into a risky group. So I'm working with Okta as my identity access management solution. Suddenly the score goes low enough. I say, okay, I want to move them over and put them in a high risk group. And then that risk group has a whole different set of policies because they're in that group versus their normal group. How's it calculated? Again, here's a 370, which is a low. Anything below, again, below 400, that range is pretty bad. So it starts at 1,000. We tried it at 100. We built this originally at 100, and it's just too tight. 100 is not enough range because you have activities. Some activities are -5, some are -10, different weightings. But 1,000 worked really good with a rolling window and the decay. There's a decay factor. When you have something that happens that's bad, as a couple days go by, it decays and it starts to fade away. So past anomalies have that declining weight and that decay rate. Again, if anything happens that you don't want to do, we can go ahead and reset that. There's user models like I talked about. You want to do the model specific to the user. Again, they compare it to a peer group. And there's also the tenant model, which is the customer, right? So that's the whole company organization. Or if it's a multinational and they have 5 or 6 tenants, then it's that specific tenant for that part of the world they operate in. And you can see some examples there. Colin normally downloads 10 files. Today, you download 1,000. There are other people in the organization who download 2,000 files a day. Low security. But the other one, when you go across the tenant model, they normally download 500, and he did 1,000, so that's twice the normal. So you get the high severity based on different models and stuff. So we do run all these. Again, this adaptive access control we talked about. So in your real-time policies, you can use the UCI score as one of the conditions in the policy to say if that score is in this range or below this range, you can go ahead and do different activities or coaching or however you want to work with the user in that transaction. So again, this is going to help with your data exfiltration program. You're now going to be able to look at like that Sankey chart I showed with Jurgen and say, okay, I've got a lot of people exfiltrating source code or whatever. I want to start to put in warnings to them. I want to start to tell them the places they can put it. I can start looking at their scores. I can start using the models to deduct from their 1,000 point score when they start doing stuff. And all this can show up in charts and maps. And your high risky users, we even have a dashboard for what we call flight risk people, people that look like they're going to leave the company because we know those activities that kind of signal that someone's probably going to quit and leave. All this is available to you in the solution to use. And again, mark is allowed, as I said several times. Just wanted to show this slide. If something happens and it's like, well, no, that's not a negative situation. You need to reset that. Boom, just go into the console, take that specific event and say, nope, it's negated. It backs and resets the score to the previous value, and you're all set. You can also report feedback to fine tune the policies and stuff. If you want to get that back to our support team and stuff, we can do that. All right, so this adaptive access goes beyond just us, right? We talked about that integration slide earlier. I showed that kind of ecosystem. And so identity risk from Okta, email risk from Mimecast, ExtraHop in there with their NDR, CrowdStrike with all their endpoint risk. We have entity risk as well, IoT stuff we do at Netskope. And so our Cloud Risk Exchange, which is part of our larger Cloud Exchange modules, allows you to exchange risk scores. It could be app risk score. In this case, it's the user risk score, UCI, can be shared with other solutions. You can bring in their stuff and bring that together. So the identity endpoint, identity risk from Okta and the endpoint risk from CrowdStrike could impact the UCI score that we use as well. So this is kind of a two-way street. It's pretty cool. It allows people to take a risk-based approach to how people access and have adaptive access. So again, this whole risk concept is not locked just within Netskope. It is expansive to other solutions. Again, Cloud Risk is available on GitHub. There's 4 modules: Cloud Log Exchange, there's or Cloud Log Shipper, there's Threat Exchange for IOC sharing for threats, there's Risk Exchange, and there's also a Cloud Ticket Orchestrator for SIM SOAR orchestration. All right, there's your CRE score and third party. Little green dot just came up there. I probably should have built that earlier. But again, we can ingest that and move it through. Here's the Cloud Exchange quick summary slide. The 4 different modules, no charge to customers, available over 100 different integrations. Plus we have APIs. We continue to build out more and more direct APIs. So you can use the direct APIs. If they're not there, then these plugin modules are ready to use and make it easy for customers to have the most options for integrations. We've done pretty well. I'll just say we're a leader in SSE, Security Service Edge. We're a leader in SaaS, but I'm watching the clock and I want to get things over to Jeff. So I'm going to stop sharing with our leadership in the MQ because to have that leadership spot, it takes more than just the controls that I talked about. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Tom. Can you see my slides okay?
Coming up right now. Got him.
Beautiful. Great content as always, Tom. And for those of you listening, I'm really going to be focusing on the plumbing now behind the scenes, the infrastructure that makes all of the services and capabilities that Tom talked about possible. And one of the things I hope you walk away from this webinar with is asking this question of us and other vendors. You know, architecture matters. You have to be asking the right questions about that plumbing, that infrastructure, the cloud that is enabling these different services and capabilities. And so we've spent a lot of time on this. We've put out some nice assets. A network scorecard is a third-party paper with broadband testing. And that's very valuable for you as you evaluate different vendors and kind of peel back the layers of the onion. What we see a lot of times is customers will think, oh, this vendor relies on the public cloud. Their solution is built on GCP. Leverage the global network of the mega super cloud. But the requirements for doing SWIG, for doing CASB, for doing ZTNA, for doing full SSE or even SASE, it's very different, right? You want to have lots of edge compute strategically positioned around the world, lots of performance, lots of resilience built in, lots of peering. So fundamentally, the infrastructure for serving cat videos or doing e-commerce or doing search is very different than the infrastructure for doing SSE and SASE, and that's why architecture matters. At the end of the day, performance, we really believe is the key to unlock the promise of SASE or SSE or even individual services. What I see time and time again is, the best case scenario is where adding all of the security services and capabilities Tom talked about can lead to a productivity hit, right? Where there's a slowdown. The worst case scenario is, users are doing an end run around security altogether, or they're starting to bypass traffic, not inspecting, for example, the personal instances of Microsoft. So what we want to do here, and we would volunteer to you is the right way to do it, is you want to marry up the two, the security and the network access and the performance piece. Because what we've seen is, if you have a performance problem, you have or you will have a security problem. So those two things have to go together, speed and the security. And the reason for that is really milliseconds matter. And I'll talk about this more as I actually talk about what we've done special here at Netskope with our infrastructure called NewEdge. But as you add latency, whether it's the on-ramp of traffic to the cloud vendor's network, or the processing of traffic and the actual inspection, or onward to the destination, whether it's Microsoft or a private app, if there's any additional latency in that round trip, you're going to see basically the throughput degrade, and you're going to see the page load times go up, skyrocket, and that user experience will fall apart. And then you lead to the productivity impact, the bypass, the users going around the security controls. And when the infrastructure hasn't been built for performance from get-go, what ends up happening is you have slow on-ramp. You have slow processing of traffic. You have, slowdowns in terms of getting to the nearest Microsoft front door. So, performance is really important. Milliseconds matter, and that latency is really key. You want to avoid that latency. So the reality is when you look at the different vendors out there and how they've built their plumbing, their infrastructure, their cloud, not all these clouds are created equal. And these are some of the questions to pose when you talk to us or you talk to other vendors. And they are surfaced in that white paper from Broadband Testing on the network scorecard. But where are the vendors' locations in terms of where they have their services, where they have compute for actually running the services and inspecting the traffic? Is every DC or data center dot on their map actually available? Is it actually in the region they advertise? There's one vendor I know where they advertise a data center in Mexico, but there's nothing there. They're sending the traffic to a completely different region over the border into Texas for processing. Or where you see, grandiose maps, even maps based on public clouds where the locations with compute are actually few and far between. For example, not to knock Google, but today they have 42, 43 compute regions, and that's great for their business. But edge compute for SSE and SASE is very different. And right now here at Netskope with our NewEdge infrastructure, we're at 78 compute regions. And then you see situations where customers might see a dot on the map, but they can't get to that data center because it's not available. There's extra fees or surcharges, or it's just completely off limits. And then, not the commitment around peering, both peering with ISPs to get fast on-ramp of traffic, but also with the destination sites like Microsoft, Google, AWS, and others. And then also some incompleteness on the SLA side. Some vendors only have SLAs for uptime and availability, but what about SLAs for security efficacy or that traffic processing piece I mentioned? And then the big one is who's responsible at the end of the day. You don't want to go to a vendor for SWIG or CASB or SSE or SASE, and the best they can do when they have a problem is then go to their public cloud provider or third-party infrastructure provider and say, hey, will you open a ticket for me? You want to have a vendor that you can go to that can see the end-to-end traffic path, that can make changes, that they have control over their infrastructure to, again, marry up security and performance. So we've taken a really different approach here. And we made this very, very large investment, well over $250 million in an infrastructure that we call NewEdge. It's our own private cloud. It's 100% built for SSE and SASE, and it's all about performance. And what NewEdge gives us is the control over our destiny, which is great. It also allows us to do a lot of unique innovation in our infrastructure, adding unique capabilities. I'll talk to you about some of those. But for the customers, it means that we not only can deliver a superior experience, but we can get the customers out of the blame game. And I've heard this from a number of customers where they were with a vendor that wrote on the public cloud, and when there was a problem, they didn't know whose fault it was. Was it their security vendor's problem? Was it the public cloud provider? They couldn't get to the bottom of it quickly. And so we want to be able to take full responsibility of that end-to-end traffic path, deliver that superior user app experience. And that's one of the things that we really focus on, and probably one of the biggest moats and differentiators here at Netskope, this infrastructure NewEdge that we've built. Now, the funny thing is, I sometimes like to joke with our marketing folks, it's one of the biggest networks in the world that no one has ever heard of, right? And so you can see here in the graph, this is public information, Hurricane Electric. You can see where Netskope with its NewEdge infrastructure ranks. We have bigger IX or Internet Exchange participation than brands like Netflix, for example. We're up there in rarefied air alongside Facebook and Microsoft and Amazon and some of the biggest CDNs in the world. And you can see on the right, based on public information, how we compare with some of the other vendors that are in the SSE and SASE space. But this is, evidence of the size of our infrastructure. It also speaks to the extensive peering and interconnection of our network. So today we have over 10,000 network adjacencies to north of 750 unique ASNs in every location possible. We peer directly with Microsoft and Google. So that path from NewEdge to those destinations is blazing fast. And just a tremendous focus on making sure that the on-ramp to us is fast, an edge as close to the user in sight as possible is available, and then to the destination as fast and efficient as possible. And a lot of times what this means for customers is investments they've made on the network side to have a private connection to Microsoft or Google, or maybe where they're backhauling traffic across their global WAN and spending a bunch in MPLS. They can get away from that, right? They can decommission some of those private links. They can get off of the expensive WAN. They can go direct to net, and they don't have to sacrifice security or performance. So, here's where we're at in terms of our map. Right now, the map, if you count up the dots, it's 77, but it's actually wrong because a week and a half ago we launched Honolulu, Hawaii, which is our 78th region. And in total, behind these 78 orange dots or 78 regions is actually north of 120 data centers. And every one of these dots is full compute, all the services that Tom talked about. This is a big deal because when you see what a lot of vendors offer, they don't have a lot of dots to begin with in terms of compute regions. But then when you double click on where they have actual individual services, you'll see vendors where they have only less than a dozen locations in the whole world where they have services like advanced URL filtering or enterprise DLP running. Why does that matter? That means that a user, and I think Tom touched on this, a user in, let's say, South America, has to have their traffic sent all the way to North America for DLP scanning, or to a completely different part of the region for threat scanning. That won't work. It's going to add latency. And when you start thinking about multiple services, SWIG, CASB, cloud firewall, data, threat protection, the traffic could be ping-ponging all over the world, tons of additional latency, huge performance hit. So every one of our regions here is full compute, all services. We peer like crazy in every location. And then you're probably scratching your head and wondering, what are the blue dots? Well, there's going to be places in the world where we're never going to put a data center. Maybe we won't put one in Vietnam anytime soon. And sure, there's an orange dot or a full compute data center nearby in Singapore or Bangkok or Manila or Taipei. And that's great. The user can get to that location and get fast performance, get the security they need. But you don't want to break the user experience. You want that user in Vietnam or in the region to get local content in the right language, not feel like their traffic is being inspected or broken. So, the blue dots represent something unique we have. Some of the vendors are catching up and starting to roll this out, but we have a 2+ year lead time in the market, something we have called a localization zone. So we identify where the user is. We ensure that no matter what data center or region they're egressing from and how they're going to Microsoft or Google or search or whatever, we align those two. So the user experience is seamless, the content is local, And so it marries up the performance, user experience, and the security piece. And so we have large customers, multinationals, where they have employees all over the world, and they love localization zones because they don't run into those issues with users complaining about the experience or decisions being made to bypass certain sites. And so this basically extends our region beyond the 78 regions we have today and 120 data centers to basically coverage in 220 countries and territories worldwide. So a tremendous infrastructure we've built out to address a customer who's just concentrated in the US or a multinational with a presence in China and India and Oceania, whatever. The other big thing I mentioned earlier on is when you evaluate these different vendors and why architecture matters is understanding the SLAs. What are the commitments, the teeth that the vendor is going to put behind their offering, right? So uptime and availability is kind of checkbox table stakes. But where we really stand out, and we're one of the few vendors that offer these two SLAs, and our SLAs are superior. One is around latency or traffic processing. So once the traffic gets to us and we're doing all the magic that Tom talked about, we want to make sure we're as efficient as possible. And so under the covers, we leverage a single pass architecture, microservices that can scale on demand, run on top of bare metal. And we have SLAs that back up this efficiency in our processing, anywhere from less than 10 milliseconds to less than 50 milliseconds, whether it's for non-decrypted or decrypted transactions. And just to frame this for you, compared to probably the two biggest players in SSE, Zscaler and Palo Alto, and this is again based on public information, we're 2 to 10 times better with our latency SLA. So this is just evidence of our commitments around performance. And then also the way we actually do our SLA calculation is more stringent. And then at the bottom, we have some powerful, unique SLAs around security efficacy, basically 100% known malware capture rate. No other vendor offers anything like this. And this really puts teeth into what Tom talked about, the effectiveness of our solution for doing security well. All these SLAs are on our public website, so you can take a look at them. You get to take advantage of them, obviously, as a customer. And then you can also compare how they stack up to other vendors. Now, as kind of a networking purist, I love the idea that we have our own client, a way that we can directly take traffic from an endpoint and send it to NewEdge and our infrastructure and do all this great security traffic processing. But we also are open to other solutions and other ways that we can provide network fit. So one of the common ones we see are customers who have an existing investment in maybe a next-gen firewall or an SD-WAN device. And while a customer can come to Netskope and get the full single vendor SASE, the SD-WAN, the SSE, all of the pieces, we also can coexist what they already have invested in and maybe give them a slower migration over time to us, starting with SSE and then adding the other capabilities. So we can support, clients steering traffic to us, legacy IPsec or GRE tunnels, and a bunch of other ways to get traffic, whether it's user traffic, guest Wi-Fi traffic, or machine traffic to us. And then we also extend controls to the customer so that if you're a US customer and you want to make sure that your traffic always stays in the US, you can pick your own footprint of data centers. And so even if your user goes to Vietnam on vacation or goes to South Africa on business, they're always going to come home to a data center in the US. And so that can be important to some customers in highly regulated industries or to address data sovereignty issues. Now, one of the big things with cloud solutions, and it affects the SSE SASE space as well as even apps like Salesforce and ServiceNow, is the unexpected events, the black swan events, the cable cuts, the backbone router failures, the internet weather sorts of things. And so we've actually even thought through this and being mindful of, while we can't necessarily control the pipe to us or the pipe from us to the destination all the time, we want to make sure that we can do whatever we can proactively to maintain that performance profile and also that security coverage. So we have some unique capabilities here that we've innovated on top of NewEdge. One is our NewEdge traffic management. And so what's nice about this is when a client connects to the nearest Netskope NewEdge data center, it's looking for the data center with the best performance, the best round trip time. And so a measurement is done to identify, in this case, LAX2 in Los Angeles is better than LAX1 in Los Angeles. And so that's the data center the user would be connected to. What's nice is the client's also aware of up to 10 data centers nearby, whether it's LAX1, SFO1 in San Francisco, Seattle 1 up north, Phoenix to the east. So if for some reason, let's say there's an earthquake or a cable cut or something unexpected that happens, and LAX2 goes offline or is unavailable or unreachable, the client on its own, without human intervention and in just seconds, will immediately connect to the next best. So in this case, probably LAX1. So this is really important for not only marrying up the coverage I talked about, the performance I've talked about, but also bringing in that resilience piece. The other one that we do that's very unique, and we can only do this because we control our infrastructure. If we were beholden to the public cloud, we couldn't do anything here. But because we have our own private cloud infrastructure, we can make some of these changes. And this is particularly timely when you read all the headlines about all the cable cuts happening in the Red Sea in the Middle East right now. We can see from our data centers if the path to the user, to the client, or northbound to the destination is having, high latency, jitter, loss. We can see if there's some sort of problem. And because our data centers are highly interconnected with lots of peering, lots of premium transit options, we can choose a different path to send the traffic to the client or northbound to the destination. And so what this allows us to do is basically use dynamic BGP changes to route around congestion, to remediate issues proactively. And under the covers, we use AI and automation to do this without human intervention. And we're doing this all the time. And sometimes it's a micro outage event, sometimes it's just internet weather. In the US, I've seen backbone router issues that have been situations where route control is kicked in, or the more significant cable cut events like I talked about with the Red Sea headlines. So the last thing to just mention, and I'll turn it back to Tom for kind of the key takeaways and the summary is, clearly Netskope, and you heard the talk track from Tom, there's a lot of depth we have on the security and on the networking side in terms of our services and our capabilities. And we've gotten all the right accolades, right? Leadership in the Forrester Waves and the Gartner MQs and all the different analyst reports. And we've gotten the shout outs for our comprehensive data protection. But I would just like to remind folks, in addition to all the other great content today, is architecture matters, So you really have to understand what is the plumbing, the infrastructure behind the provider's network. And we believe, and we've gotten this feedback from the analyst community and many other customers. If you have significant requirements around performance, if performance matters to you, you need to really look at a vendor who runs their own infrastructure, who has that end-to-end control. And we have that with NewEdge, and a big investment and a big team behind making that happen. So back to you, Tom, on the key takeaways.
All
And I
right,
can just
audio, video back on. Yeah, Jeff, I mean, the route control, all the stuff we can do with the global load balancing, the regional data sovereignty, and the dedicated egress IPs, which could be regional or global, so that when entering your managed SaaS apps, the users can only come from those IP addresses, which are unique to you. That's a kind of cool feature. So when we run our own infrastructure, there's 4 examples right there what we can do for you that you can't go to Google and say, hey, I want my own dedicated IP addresses. We won't do that. Or I want something like Cloud Tap. I want to tap traffic, get a copy, and send it over to Extra Hop so my NDR can analyze it, or another NDR solution out there. And because we have our infrastructure, we can do that kind of stuff. Now, context is key to the message. In this webinar, we created a little book, Close the Gaps, Your Security Strategy. There's 10 different key points in this book. Each one has 5 different elements. So being the author of it, there's actually 50 different reasons in here why you need rich content and context, the future of generative and agentic AI and how it ties into that. You can't have the blind spots. Again, performance is very key, like Jeff talked about. Architecture matters. And so there's check your email. You'll get a follow-up on this event to download that. Jeff's report from Broadband will also be included in there. So we got some great content for you to look at. Ask yourself some good questions. If you're shaping an RFI or a project or building out requirements, then that guide right there is a good thing to update your RFI and your checklist of what you're shopping for and what you're looking for in the future controls, because what you buy today is what's going to handle things for 5, 10 years down the road. So you have to kind of think about today, but think about the future. Think about a platform that's going to be something you can live with and expand with. There's certain things you may not use today, but you want them tomorrow. You want to make sure they're there. You want to make sure they're high performance, and the user experience is never degraded. And so it's kind of our key message. Let me turn things back over to Leigh to wrap things up.
All right. Thank you guys so much. That was a really great presentation and really appreciate y'all joining us today and for your time. And thanks to everyone that tuned into the webinar as well. We have this obviously available on our website. We have additional webinars, so feel free to go there, peruse our webinar library, as well as resource downloads. We have a lot of those there as well. ridgeit.com. It's also where we post our upcoming events, so you can go ahead and save your spot. And while you're there, feel free to book some time with our cybersecurity experts. They will always be there and available to answer your questions. And so thanks again, you guys. I really appreciate it. Great presentation, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.